Good evening. We'll get started this evening with a few announcements. Keep dropping everything. Our invitation song tonight is number 948. 948. We have quite a few announcements, so bear with me. A few prayer requests. Please continue to remember Ellen Rao, who is in the hospital still recovering from COVID. Also, continue to pray for Barbara Campbell. She's been moved from the hospital to skilled nursing at the Fountains at Canterbury. We rejoice with the Mayfield family. Eden was able to be released from the hospital, so that is answer to a lot of prayers. Also, continue to pray for Beth Rollins, who's in Mercy Rehab, and also answer to prayer. She is improving as well. Please pray for a family friend of Roland Brumlow. His father passed away. It's the Jenkins family, so please pray for that family during this time of loss. Affirming the Faith is just around the corner, less than a month until we have that great seminar. We still need volunteers for various things: setup, parking, ushers, childcare, kitchen, lunch tickets, cleaning, and just some general areas to volunteer as well. So please sign up over at the iPad kiosk right over there. Please note that the gym is going to be closed beginning February 21st to give us enough time to clean or to sweep the floors, wax the gym floor, and get that all set up for the seminar on March 5th. BK leaders, if you plan to attend the appreciation luncheon on February 20th, please RSVP to one of the BK deacons, Rob Schwartz, Kirby Edmondson, or Dave Sams by this Sunday. Again, our invitation song is number 948. Tonight, our devotional will be brought to us by Stephen Nichols. Stephen?
Good evening. So, as most of you probably know by now, we've been going through the fruits of the Spirit on Wednesday evenings over this past month, and this week's word is going to be self-control. So today I want to answer a few questions about the word self-control in scriptural context. So the first question I want to answer is, what is self-control? So the word translated as self-control here in Galatians chapter 5 is defined as self-mastery and power over self. So in a very practical sense of the word, it is the ability to deny and delay gratification for the purpose of something better. It is important we understand that as long as we are on this earth, we will be tempted by evil. And we do not have the ability to defend ourselves from it if we have no self-control. As Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28 puts it, a man without self-control is like a city that is broken into and without walls. We are constantly under attack, and if we do not defend ourselves by having self-control, then it is as if we are a city that is already broken into and we have no walls. So without self-control, we are defenseless to inevitable temptation, which will lead to us hurting ourselves, hurting others, and hurting God. If we want to be like Jesus, we must practice self-control. Jesus shows us countless examples of self-control throughout his recorded life, such as being tempted by Satan in Matthew chapter 4 and going to the cross for us, even while people were mocking him and telling him to save himself. And as followers and imitators of Christ, we must also practice self-control. So we know that self-control is to have power and mastery over self and the ability to deny and delay gratification for a greater purpose. And we know it is important to defend ourselves from sin and to keep us from hurting ourselves, hurting others, and hurting God. And we know it is essential for us to be imitators of Christ. So the next question I want to answer is, how do we practice it and grow in this area? So the first way is to exercise it. Much like muscle, the more you use it, the more it will grow. Once someone hurts their conscience, it becomes much easier to do that same thing again later. Paul wrote in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, about liars seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron. The more you hurt your conscience, the weaker it will become. By practicing self-control, we guard our conscience and therefore make it easier to practice self-control in the future. I think it's also important for us to have a proper perspective of what is important. We must have a reason to practice self-control. If temporary and physical things are more important to you than eternal and spiritual things, then you are not likely to have the self-control to keep yourself from those temporary things that tempt you. So we must maintain a perspective of what is most important. My dad would always tell me growing up that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I believe that if we do that, then we'll have much greater motivation to practice self-control. So to grow our self-control, we must exercise it, and we must have a perspective that gives us motivation. And finally, as it says in Acts chapter 2, verse 38, you must repent, and each of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, which produces in us the fruit of self-control, along with the other fruit of the Spirit which we have gone over this past month. If you have not yet taken this step to be baptized and you are ready to now, or if this is a new concept to you and you want to study it further, please come forward as we stand and sing.
Will you bow with me? Heavenly Father, God, we are thankful and blessed for this day that you've given us, God, and we're thankful for this time that we have to take time out of the middle of the week to come together, to worship you, to study your word, and God, just to be in fellowship with one another. God, I pray that you are with those that are not here tonight, Lord, those that are still sick, those that are dealing with other issues right now, Lord, I pray that you watch over them. Continue, Lord, to be with them where they are. God, be with our teachers that are leading us in our studies tonight, Lord. Continue to watch over us all as we finish the rest of this week. And we ask this all through your Son's holy name. Amen.
All right, well, let's get started. Glad you're here. We have some handouts in the back if you haven't taken one yet and you would like one, or take one on your way out. We're continuing the study of everyone's favorite book of the Bible. Of course, we're talking about Leviticus, and we have tonight and then 2 more Wednesdays. I know that brings sadness to all, that's the study must end, but 2 more Wednesdays as we will wrap up Leviticus. So, in summary, once again, Leviticus, the role Leviticus plays in the storyline of the Bible is how to draw near to God. How can a broken, sinful, unclean, contaminated humanity approach a holy God? Or in other words, how can God, in His holiness, be a part in the middle of, in the center, gathering a humanity to Himself, being that this humanity is sinful, contaminated, evil, broken, so forth, so forth. And the answer is the wonders of what happens in Leviticus. Now, it's weird. It's beyond our sensitivities. It's not culturally common and normal in our setting. But once again, you need to understand that God speaks to humanity through humanity at the time, at particular times, and cultures, and languages, and customs. And so what the role Leviticus plays, once again, is drawing near to God through that cultural setting and context. And we've walked ourselves through the elements of it, trying to see how do those rituals or those festivals or the role of priests and all those things, how does that allow humanity, specifically Israel, to draw near to God? Well, we've looked last week or 2, 3 maybe. One of the things we looked at were these 7 rituals and the significance they played, the role, the remembrance part that they played, and what the details of kind of each one of those was. And then we took the time to look in more detail the Passover. We were going to look at Day of Atonement today, but I think the Sabbath, maybe it's the better order. Next week we'll look at the Day of Atonement in more detail, and then we'll kind of wrap it up after that. So today, the Sabbath rest. What's that all about? What role does that play? And what's the significance and practicalities of that for you and I today? So the Sabbath, we have to begin in the beginning. Surprise to everybody. So Genesis. It's important to start in Genesis because why the need for the Sabbath? Right? It's not random. It's coming from the beginning there. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was formless and void and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And we've talked a lot about that, but just in summary, to remind you, what's happening here is God creates the realms, and the physical realm is in chaos. It begins in chaos, because chaos was a common reoccurring theme in that ancient world, in the competing creation stories of the time. And what the ancients were worried about was, how do we get from chaos to order, and what role do the gods play? Our modern minds were worried about, how do we know from nothingness to something, and matter and protons and photons and whatever else. That's not what they cared about. And so the answer that right off the bat is the presence of the God, of this God, of Yahweh God. And His very presence takes from chaos to order. Important. That starts a process of progression, creation, not out of some cosmic battle as some of the other stories, but of just the sheer presence of this God. This God, Yahweh, is about order, beauty, progression, purpose. An exclusive claim made about this God is He is a God that bears life. Like He is uniquely the source of life. So then in Genesis 1:31, we have creation going on because of God. And then in summary, God saw that all he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day, which, by the way, is a repetition of the previous 5 days. Like God is creating different things, and there's a reason for the particular order of stuff, which we don't have time to look into. But at the end of each one of those days, or those cycles, God saw that it was good, and that it always says, and there was evening and morning, the first day, the second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day. You see a pattern, right? 6 previous times. Okay. Now let's go to Genesis 2. Hold all that in your mind. Genesis 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he Shabbat, or Sabbath, which literally means, Shabbat is Hebrew. It literally means he ceased. Here they go on and say, rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it unique, set apart, holy, because on it he Shabbat from all the work of creating he had done. Now, 6 previous times it then says, and there was evening and morning the end of that day. 6 times. And you get to the seventh day, and it doesn't say that at all. And I go, all right, we know the seventh day has begun, because we just ended the 6th, so the 7th. And the 7th is unique. And it's unique because God has ceased. He has stopped. He has finished. He's accomplished what his presence was to accomplish, which was chaos to order. That has been completed. And so God ceased, or Shabbat, and I think it's implied also rest. When does that day end? It doesn't. And I don't think he's talking about like, and the Saturday never ends. I think he's talking about, and the concept of what the Shabbat is to be about was to be a reality from there forward. But spoiler alert, and then there's Genesis 3. And whatever that Shabbat was about, it's about to be, chaos is going to start to return. So whatever Shabbat is to be, and it has to do with the idea of like chaos, all the way to order. And once we get to this reality that God has created, which excludes chaos, we were to live a reality of peace, of rest, of completeness, of order. But guess what? We're going to make a mess of it, because humanity, welcome to humanity. So chapter 3, you understand the whole story of the serpent and evil, and we've talked a lot about that already, so I'm going to skip along until we're going to get to verse 17, chapter 3, verse 17. We're on the other side of Adam and Eve, making the choice of rolling their eyes at God, and we got this, and we're going to do whatever makes us happy. We're going to be like God. We're going to be deciding what's right and wrong. We're going to create our own world, which is really just a different way of saying we're going to bring chaos back. I don't think they understood that's what they were doing. They just were deceived. Verse 17. So to Adam, God said, because you've listened to your wife and ate the fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. What's reality now going to look like? Cursed is the ground because of you. It's going to be cursed. Whatever Shabbat is, it's now the opposite. There's a cursed version of reality. And what are some things that's going to be a part of this cursed reality? Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground. Since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you'll return. You know what? The joys we now get to exist in, not that open-ended Shabbat, what we now get to exist in is a reality that is cursed with pain and thorns and thistles and hard work. Not like the kind that builds character, Grandpa, it just builds character. Yeah, this is grinding you back unto dust. We live in a reality where we now it's just grinding us back to dust, which is how we started, but with the presence of God. And we're just going to go back into the dust. So the reality we now live in is a horrible mess. It's not Shabbat. Now, in other words, welcome to reality. Do I need to explain to you how life is rough? Anybody here not aware? God bless you if that's your case, right? I mean, it's a mess. Now, God had blessed humanity, and God created humanity to be a blessing, and so that comes from God. But now we have opened the doors for this hellish existence to come back. And from chaos and evil is now ruling and trying and pushing, and the very opposite of what that open-ended Shabbat was to be. So now that we live in a world where Shabbat is not a reality, right? It's not, there's other things happening. Let's bring that back, shall we? How? Well, one way is we need a constant reminder. So let's go to the 10 Commandments. Deuteronomy, I know the 10 Commandments, we have word warriors. Where's the 10 Commandments found? Exodus 20. Where's the 10 Commandments found? Yeah, where's the 10 Commandments found? Deuteronomy 5 is also a correct answer. And I'm not doing the Caleb thing here, like Sermon on the Mount, and he's like, 9, 5, 7, math, Leviticus, poor guy, he's confused, it's fine. So, yes, Exodus 20 is where we often go to it, but it's also repeated in Deuteronomy 5. And there's different layers of details, but we're going to go Deuteronomy 5, okay? So good job, everybody. So the 10 Commandments is the heart of 613 commandments. That's the total of them, 10 of them, 603 more, given in different kind of spurts. A lot of them given there at Mount Sinai and so forth, but that's not the end of them. And the role they play is in this covenant relationship that God was confirming, reestablishing with the people that he had started with Abraham, and now there's the people. And the covenant is, I will be your exclusive God, and you will gather around my presence. Okay? That's also where we get a lot of those things from Leviticus, because that's going to be problematic, how we put those two things together. And the commandments, the 10 Commandments, have at the heart of it to be kind of the heartbeat of that covenant relationship. And an important part of the 10 Commandments is, and so let's read here, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it unique, as the Lord your God had commanded you. Where did he do that? Actually in Genesis. Right? That's where it starts. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son, daughter, male, female, servants, ox, donkey, animals, foreigner, nobody's supposed to work. It's to be a day of rest and peace. Why? In Deuteronomy, I think, kind of takes a different angle at it. Verse 15, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and a stretched arm. Therefore, Tim is the English major. It's not even my first language, but I'm guessing therefore means whatever's been said previously leads you to the next point. Am I right on that? Am I good? Okay, therefore, because God brought you out of Egypt, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. What does one have to do with the other? First of all, that's right, like slavery, they didn't get a day off under Egypt's rule, under that worldview, under that way of that empire. Second, the very concept of Sabbath is one that is not what Egypt was doing. And I don't mean once again, stop thinking just the Saturday. The reality of Shabbat is not what Egypt was doing. They were doing the very opposite of it. Violence, chaos, darkness, death. And one sentence there that it says that Egypt was doing to Israel was grinding them back to the dust. So that sentence there in Genesis is then exemplified in the story of Egypt doing that to Israel. The story of Egypt exemplifies what does the world that is void of the reality of Shabbat looks like. It's a mess. It's oppressive. It's violent. There's competition. There's using and abusing. There's working unto death. Because you've been freed from that, we're going to now take a weekly remembrance that God is a God who's freeing you from that reality. And really had created a reality that was supposed to be void of that completely, that we have allowed to return. So on a weekly basis, remember, it's not just take a rest. That's part of it. What are you resting from? It's not about a nap. You're resting from 6 days that are the world of chaos returning. And on the Sabbath, on one day, you rest from that back to the dust we go. That labor unto death. And you're going to rest from that and you're going to remember actually this is what the world was supposed to be. Peaceful, harmonious, void of hard, laborious unto death, one of the presence of God. So you're going to remember, you're going to reenact a version of it, right, by not working. So you're reenacting a version of what God intended humanity to be. You're going to remember that God's presence is the only way for Shabbat to return, because if you go back to the story in Genesis, chaos unto Shabbat, how do we get there? The presence of God. Now we're back into chaos. How do we know that? What you've been doing the last 6 days. Chaotic living. How do we get from that to Shabbat? The presence of God. Does that make sense? It's not just about a nap. Naps are nice. Right? All right. But it doesn't stop on the Saturday. That's a weekly reminder. There was also the 7th year reminder. So once a week, on the 7th day, then the 7th year is special. So here's where we pick up Leviticus 25, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land that I am to give you," right, we're talking about entering the promised land, "the land itself must also observe Shabbat." The land need a nap? But what's been happening to that land? It's promised, It's supposed to be a great place. God's people is supposed to move into there. What's currently happening to that land? It's being defiled. There's other people groups there that are not Shabbating, right? I don't even know if that's the verb. They're not in Shabbat. They're not living a reality of peace. They are cruel and brutal and killing and exploiting and violent. And even part of their gods was to have children burnt alive offered to one of their gods. So are they Shabbating? Is that the reality God intended humanity to be? Absolutely not. So that land is in chaos. What do we need to fix that? The presence of God. But now we're going to have the presence of God in his image bearers, Israel. You with me? Do you see how Genesis is repeated? And so now when we get into that chaos, we're going to start molding that into peace or into order, into Shabbat, so it can then be the promised land experience. It doesn't just mean a geography, it means a reality, right? Which in this particular case includes a geography. So it needs a Shabbat, so when you get there, you're going to make that happen. How? For 6 years, you're going to sow your fields, and for 6 years, you're going to prune your vineyards, and you're going to gather their crops. That's also important because that's how you survive, right? You with me? Food. I don't know, the younger generation, I'm not sure if they understand plants and things. That doesn't come from the grocery store, right? There's some other things happening. There's like this thing called farmers. It's really exciting. So, verse 5, do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your vineyards. Verse 4. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Shabbat to the Lord. So do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields, in other words, on its own, by the grace of God, right? By the grace of God, whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you. For yourself, your female and male servants, your hired workers, your temporary residents who live among you, as well as for your livestock, the wild animals in your land, whatever the land produces, then you eat. But none that was done by you. Well, that's I don't know. Does that cause anybody anxiety? What if it's not a good year? Go tell a farmer, you just take a year off. How's that go? Farmers even know what that means? Take a year, like take time off? But why do that on the 7th year? Like, what's the point of this exercise? Besides, there's probably crop rotation. There's probably some like agricultural good sense to this as well. But what really is God trying to teach here? Trust that God will provide. Because, by the way, who actually even created this whole thing? God. So on the 7th year, will you take the entire year to really show that you believe the Genesis story? That God provides, that God creates, that God is the source of life. So whatever grows out there, you can go out and pick it, but you're not carrying, you're not pruning, you're not plowing, you just go in there, whatever comes out of the ground, whatever's on the trees. So it's on this weekly, every day, right? Once a week, Sabbath. Then on the 7th year, then on the 7 sevens, or 7 times 7. So that's our next point, Leviticus 25, verse 8. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7th Sabbath year amount to a period of 49 years. So some good math. 7 times 7? Yes, thank you. 49. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere. On the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year. So on that year, on that cycle, you already have the seventh year, right? So that whole year, you're already not pruning. You're not caring for stuff. You just trust God is going to do. Then the 50th year, so the next year right after, there's supposed to be something special going on there. So 49, 7 sevens, now that very next year, so you take that whole 7th year off, the very next year, that in this case is now the 50th year, consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, that's the year of Jubilee. Each of you is to return to your family's property and in your own clan. So if you sold your property, in reality you're renting your property out. Because on that 50th year, now how often they actually kept this, it's debatable. But they were supposed to return all properties to their original person and or clan family line. So all that returns. And there's even more details that we're skipping here. Also, any debts you had by this time has to be zeroed out. If you had, in a sense, sold yourself into debt slavery, like I owe you money, I can't pay it, so I'm going to work my way out of it, it also has to be wiped out by here. So this year was a year, and it's like probably once in your generation, that it kind of resets. It's like we're going to start anew. Whatever mess you got into now, we're going to start anew. So the idea of Shabbat is several things. We normally just think of it, take a day off. It's a whole reality that God created that was to be open-ended experience of us living in an orderly reality because of the presence of God, Genesis. It's also to be a weekly reminder of the world that we have lost. 6 days we live the grind. On the seventh day, the Saturday, we're to pause, rest, remember, contemplate, thank God, do family, do community. We're to give everybody a pause. Then on the 7th year, we are also to remind ourselves that in reality, God is the source of provision. You and I mean you and I as in like a generic you and I, in our current modern world, we suffer from the illusion of control. Yeah, you think you're in charge of stuff. I think I'm in charge of stuff. We're not. We're not. Perhaps one of the reasons why anxiety is just everywhere. Because we're really not. So on a 7th year, you're going to take an entire year of deep contemplation on the fact that I'm not in charge. And you know how I'm going to live that out? I'm not going to go out and work, which is my livelihood, in terms of I'm going to feed myself. God will. Anybody want to try that out? Y'all want to? We're already in February. Y'all want to start now?
That might be good as a preacher.
Yeah, that's right. Can we get a year of Shabbat, the preachers here? No, you got to trust God. How hard and intense, how intense is that? It might be fun, a couple weeks, a month. You're like, yeah. You start eating your nails because you're like, is stuff going to grow? You understand you can just go to a grocery store. You were growing stuff. But now in reality you realize God's been growing it all along. And He just let me participate in the process. So then that's the 7th year. And then 7 sevens, we're going to restart, and basically we're going to try to zero out the mess we've made of ourselves. The debt and the slavery and all that mess. We're just going to zero it out, start again. How cool would that be? Now, once again, to whatever degrees they did these things, then that's debatable, because, welcome to humanity. But it was meant to be freedom, rest, trust in God, all these things. Now, I get it. We're not Sabbathists. We don't keep the Saturday. Should we not be about these concepts? Do you think this just narrows down to the Saturday? Come on. Of course we're supposed to be about these concepts. Here's some problems, though. Here's some challenges, right? Humanity, we're still, it's rough. Hebrews chapter 4. There's some obstacles to keeping the Sabbath, or the Sabbath reality. Don't just hear me say Saturday. The Shabbat, the reality of what all this means, it's still a challenge. In Hebrews chapter 4, the writer is making some compare and contrast between Jesus and the backstory. So he says, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands. That's still kind of, it's happening, not yet happened. Like, wait are we resting? Is this heaven? Are we done with the grind? Hold those questions. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. So it's kind of still open-ended, but we can get ourselves out of it. So what's happening here? Verse 2, for we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did. So, wait a minute, they had good news too? I know we normally associate good news in baptism, but it's more than that. What is the essence of the good news? That the horrible mess we live in is not God's intent for humanity. Is that not good news? And there's more. God's doing something about it. And so they were excited about that good news, and they had lived out in a very intense way the bad news, just they're in Egypt being oppressed. And so now they've been liberated from that, and that's part of the good news, liberated from the mess of humanity. And now God was working through these symbolisms, the Saturday, the seventh year, the 7 sevens, the year Jubilee. Like, God is reminding them the good news that God is working towards that Shabbat to return. Just like in Genesis, chaos, Shabbat, God is working towards that again. So that's good news. We also have that good news. But then Jesus is the fulfillment of it. But the idea has been coming. Jesus didn't just stuff out of nothing. The good news in Jesus is a good news coming. Fulfilled in Jesus. You with me? And so they have the good news, we have the good news, but the message they heard was of no value to them. Why not? Because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. In other words, they didn't always live out the reality of Shabbat. And I don't mean they just worked on a Saturday. I mean, they didn't live out what it was supposed to be reflective of. So they didn't always keep those things, those reminders. Verse 3, now we who have believed enter the rest, just as God has said, so I declare on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest, and yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. So what is he quoting? Psalms 95, which for your delight, I have included it here, and we're going to read a bigger section of it. So here's the suggestions. This is a side point. When New Testament writers quote the Old Testament, I recommend you go back there and see what's happening. What they're doing is with one sentence, sometimes 2, 3, they're trying to upload an entire backstory. And so if you go back and you get that backstory, you're doing yourself a good service. So let's quote chapter 95, Psalms 95. Let's start verse 8 and go through 11. We could have read the whole chapter, but time, so at least a little bit more. Today, if only you would hear my voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, or you did the day of Massah in the wilderness. So those are stories in the wilderness where Israel did not listen to God, right? Which were many of them, many stories. But they're stories in the wilderness, the whole 40 years and all that. They did not listen, okay? Hold that thought. But if you would listen, they didn't, but if you would, that's what the psalmist is saying. Verse 9. Were your ancestors, they tested me, they tried me, though they had seen what I did. They knew I'm Yahweh. They knew I saved them from Egypt. They knew I would sustain them in the wilderness. But they still didn't trust. They still didn't believe. They still acted in disbelief, in disobedience, testing if all the things they knew were somehow not true. Verse 10, for 40 years I was angry with that generation, and I said, they are a people whose heart go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declare, and here's what's Hebrew writers quoting, so I declare on an oath in my anger, they shall not enter my rest. Yeah, that's a hard 40-year lesson now, isn't it? You did not trust. You did not believe. You did not participate in the Shabbat reality. So now you're not going to live in that rest. In other words, you want to roll your eyes and say, it's my life and I'm going to do whatever I want. Well, fine. But then you're going to live in that reality that you're going to do whatever you want. Now, thankfully, as parents, we don't let our kids, some kids like 5 years old, it's my life. You're like, okay, don't let them live in that world yet, right? They're not ready, and you know it. But so we roll our eyes at God. They rolled their eyes at God, and God said, very well, y'all are adults. I'll let you live in that world. And it was a world of 40 years of mess. Dying, like just laboring unto death. So then we're going to start over. We're going to go into the promised land, right? We got that reset. So the Hebrew writer in quoting this is saying, don't you be like that. And who's the you don't be like that? Those in Jesus. You, me. You ever read the Old Testament stories like, what's wrong with these people? Yeah, they're people. Well, wait a minute, I'm people. Yeah, that's a problem. See, let's not separate ourselves from the human condition, the human mess. So he's saying, just because you're in Jesus, do not think that you can't get yourself out of that mess or get yourself in the mess and get yourself out of the rest. Hebrews 4, continue verse 6. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go into it because of their disobedience, right? Remember these stories. God again set a certain day, actually calling it today. He's still quoting Psalm 95. In Psalm 95 it said, today, listen. And so what the Hebrew writer is saying, every day that you have is God saying, today, I'm giving you a chance. So today, North MacArthur family, today, this he did when a long time later he spoke through David. He's going to quote, what I just told you. Today, if you hear my voice, do not harden your heart. So what is he warning the original audience of Hebrews? Were Christians, house churches, following Jesus, yet many of them were starting to fall away from that because it was getting really hard to live in that world where the oppression, the Romans were starting to oppress Christians. And so they were starting to slack or struggle to trust that God could still provide. So they were leaving. And the Hebrew writer's like, oh, do you not read the stories? Was it hard for them? It's hard for you. So he's valid. It is hard. But don't leave. You're getting yourself out of the Shabbat that God is intended in creating and moving and molding in Jesus. You're getting yourself out of that mess, or out of that into the mess. So verse 8, we're still chapter 4 here, verse 8. Here's the reason. For if Joshua, because Joshua was the one that led people into the promised land, right? Joshua had given them rest, or in other words, or complete rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their work, just as God did from his. So let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following the example of disobedience. It's this weird, like, we're in it but not yet. It's like, it's now but not yet. So in Jesus, we are in God's rest, yet we're still in this mess. Does that make sense? We're still living here. So we're experiencing it, but not yet completely done. And it's not that Jesus isn't enough, is that we're still in a world where chaos is at work. And God is, it's like we're back in Genesis 1 through 7, day 1 through 7. Jesus is God's Spirit there in chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. We're still in a world of chaos. But God, through Jesus, or through His Spirit, or through the presence of God in Jesus, He is laboring us into a reality of Shabbat that will be completed on the other side of eternity. So it's like, metaphorically, we are reliving the first 7 days of creation, from chaos to Shabbat. Does that make sense? And Jesus is, so we're there, but not yet. It's progressing. But the presence of God in Jesus is doing it. And you and I got to stick with it. And we actually get to also participate in the process of restoration, or the process of chaos to order, chaos to Shabbat. We get to participate in it as image bearers of God in Jesus. It's super cool. So he's not just saying sit around and wait. Stick with it and actively participate in that reality. How can we do that? Well, the essence of what those symbolisms were about. The weekly remembrance of, like, pause, take a time. We can do that on a Sunday, don't we? Like the Lord's Supper, don't we stop, pause, think, reflect. Jesus on the cross, what does that mean to me and you? What does that mean to us? So we're doing that, the essence of that. But there's also more, right? What's the seventh year about? It's the idea of us trusting that God in reality is providing for us. So you can go and you work and stuff, but don't get lost in the illusion we're in control. And it's also a concept of the way we treat each other should be a way of freedom, of easing each other's burdens. Sometimes we do that financially for each other. Sometimes we do that in a lot of other ways. Right? And so it's not just specific days, it's how we live is the concept of Shabbat. How we live. Okay, so then verse 14, still in Hebrews. Here's how Jesus really comes into a lot of this. Therefore, there's a lot of therefores here in Hebrews. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, which is part of the God is working Shabbat out of this mess we're in. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. In other words, we have a high priest, which is a category of intercession, who has lived in a world of chaos. Jesus, did he experience some chaos? So he knows. He can empathize. He can sympathize. And he is also, he came to be creating Shabbat out of that chaos. And then, guess what? In Jesus, baptism, all that, what do we believe to have with us? The Spirit of God, who's the very author there in chapter 1 of Genesis of what starts to push out the chaos. Guess what that's also doing? Pushing out the chaos in us, as we are then agents of pushing out the chaos around us. Once again, how cool is that? For verse 16, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. What is that time of need? Sure, some specific sins, I'm struggling with this, that, or that. Yes, that's okay. I think he means this time of need as in the current reality we still live in until we're done on the other side of eternity. This current mess where chaos still reigns to some degree or another, God is helping us in this time as we're going towards Shabbat. Once again. Can you see how it all connects? Hopefully I'm doing it justice. So, Shabbat, very, very important then, now, and on the other side of eternity. Let's close with a prayer, and then next week, God willing, we will talk about the Day of Atonement, then we have one more class after that. Pray with me. Dear God, we thank you for your love, your kindness, your presence. We thank you for taking reality from chaos to Shabbat. We thank you for still being present as humanity brought chaos back in our lives, in our relationships, in ourselves, in the way we do community. But that your presence still here, and that you've still been pushing it out of us, out of humanity, and how that finds its fulfillment in Jesus until the other side of eternity, where we will completely be in Shabbat with you. Thank you for your peace, for your rest, and thank you for the path in Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. All right, go ye in Shabbat.